Hello, and welcome to my talk, The State of Web Components. Today we're going to be going on to a journey that will be looking into the past, coming to the present, and looking right into the future. But before we do go on this crazy journey, let's figure out what web components are, because after all, this talk is called The State of Web Components. So, what are web components? Web components are components that are completely platform agnostic. And what does this mean? Well, this is just a fancy way to say that they run equally well across more than one platform. But their main goal is actually to have this encapsulation, so that there won't be any styling or behavioral leakages in or out. We can also encapsulate them into reusable packages so that we can then share them across teams, and that way we gain maximum interoperability, which is really nice. And we'll take a look at the benefits of that a bit later in the talk. So web components actually consist of four main technologies. It's not a technology in itself. And let's take a look at these four technologies to get a better understanding of how these work. So we're going to start with HTML template. HTML template is basically a HTML tag called template. It's nothing new, it's been around for quite a while, and that's where we're going to put the template of our web component. And what we can do when we create this is that we can clone it as many times as we like. And by doing so, the browser's only going to pass it once, which really speeds things up for us. So let's take a look at an example. Now here what we want to achieve is an image gallery with its corresponding images inside. And this is how we will do it. So all we're doing is adding the first image and then we're cloning it. And like I said, is that the browser will only pass this once, no matter how many times we do this. So that's quite nice. It makes it nice and speedy, and we have our template ready for our web component. The next technology is custom elements. So sometimes I hear custom elements used interchangeably with web components, and however this isn't quite correct because it's just one of the technologies, even though it is the technology that allows us to create that tag, that HTML tag, or we can improve already existing ones or extend them. And this is really cool because we can actually name them however we want to. So we have our own HTML tag and we name it how we want to. We just need to remember to add a dash so that the browser knows that we're talking about a web component. And how will we do this? Well, this is a very, very simplified version. However, we will be going into more depth in just a bit. So what we do is we have a class, and in this case it's called login button, and it's extended from the HTML element. And we do this because that way we're inheriting all of the special methods that we're getting from HTML elements, so that we have an attribute change callback, we have a connected callback, again things we will look at in just a second. But I just want to note that these methods are called custom element reactions. So if you hear me talking about that, then this is what I'm referring to. And then what we're doing at the bottom is calling custom elements.define. And here we have the name, the login dash button. That's going to be the name of our HTML tag. And then we have the login button now. So when the browser actually sees this, it's going to construct and render a new instance of the login button class. However, this element will not behave like a HTML button unless the author adds all of the necessary attributes, event listeners, callbacks, and accessibility functionality to handle user interactions and so forth. So just keep that in mind, that you have to add all of this yourself. And that's what it would look like. So if we wanted to add it to our HTML, this is what our HTML tag would look like. And then we have the style attribute there with some funkiness going on. If you're not used to CSS custom variables, don't worry. We're taking a look at them in just a bit, but this is what they look like. And you always have to add a dash before. One of the major benefits of creating our own HTML tag is that we're getting rid of that div soup that we all love so much. And yeah, so we won't have this anymore. Now our third technology is Shadow DOM. And this is the way that we actually encapsulate our web component so that we won't have any styling or behavioral leakages in or out. And I don't know about you lot, but it's happened to me that even me myself, I've touched the general CSS and boom, my component has changed. And we don't want that to happen, do we? So we add our Shadow DOM. And what we're doing here is we're calling attach shadow, and we have mode open. Now, this is so that the developer who's using the web component can manipulate the structure of the component using JavaScript. And this is beneficial because I might have created an image gallery at the beginning when I created a template, and for me, it's just a simple image gallery that I'm going to use in a web application. However, imagine someone that has maybe a native mobile app and wants to use a slider, right? And finds this kind of image gallery that's a slider, and then they're like, yeah, well, maybe I could actually use this to be a page slider and not just an image slider. Well, if we leave mode open, we're giving them the flexibility and possibility to do so. Whereas if we closed it, then they wouldn't be able to do that. So if you can, leave it open, but if you really, really don't want to, you can always close it. And you put mode closed instead of open. And then on the second line, what we're doing is we're simply we're cloning the template, and instead of appending it to the DOM, we're appending it to the show DOM. And last but not least, we have ES modules, and that way we can develop our web components in a modular way. So if you're used to JavaScript application development, you're used to modules. And what we can then do is define the interface of your custom element in a JS file, which is then included with the type module attribute. And this is basically what it would look like there. So now we've covered the 4 technologies of web components, let's actually put them all together and build a web component. And what we're going to do is build a simple UI button, which I'm going to call login button, but you can call it whatever you like. And also what it's going to do is allow the developer to change the text inside the button. So that's why we have that text attribute there. It's a very simple UI button, but please note that web components can be much, much more powerful than this. This is just an example. So first we're going to create our template. We have some styling, which we will get back to. I promise you we will get to the styling, but it's an important part, so we're going to have to pause a bit there, but a tiny bit later. And then what we have here is our button, and we have 2 attributes. ID text, which is what we're going to use to change the text attribute in our web component, and then the class button. Here is where we are defining our custom element. So we're going to call the class login button. It's extending the HTML element. Also, what I didn't mention before is that when we extend the HTML element, we're saying that we want it to be recognized as a DOM element. And then we have constructor, and we call super, so we have access to all the APIs there. We then need to add our shadow DOM, which we've already seen, so we're not going to pause too much here. And then here's where we're going to get the observed attribute static property. And it's going to return an array with the name of the component's attributes, which in this case is just 1. And then this property is asking the browser to basically be notified when the value of any of these attributes change. So if we then want to capture these notifications from the browser, we can do so by implementing the attribute change callback. And this is one of the methods that I was talking about that's called custom element reactions. And you can implement it to handle some events in the lifecycle of the component. Then we have the connected callback, which is another custom element reaction. And this is actually called when the component is added to the page's DOM. And what we're saying here is basically this is our template, and then we're just creating a render function there. Now in our render, this is basically what we want to render. And for text, we want to get the text, but if there isn't anything there in the attribute, then what we have is this default value, which is click me. And that's just in case the first option doesn't exist. And that's basically it. We do have some accessibility things going on there, which is great. It can be improved, obviously, but this is just a short demo. And we have our login button there. So if I were to change the attribute text, that I put something else instead of login, that would show up on the button. Now, if you want to play around with this code, you see the Stack Blitz logo at the top there. You can just click on that when I share my slides, and then you're good to go. And pretty cool, huh? It's all very exciting. I don't know about you, but I think it's pretty cool that we can build something so native to the web and then package it up and reuse it across teams. But who am I to be talking about this or be saying any of this? Because I haven't introduced myself yet. So I'm Anna Cidre, and I'm a developer advocate for Auth0. Now, Auth0 is a flexible drop-in solution to add authentication and authorization services to your applications. If you have any questions about web components, about Auth0, or just want to say hi, feel free to reach out at any time. My DMs are open. That is my Twitter handle down there. And you'll see my Twitter handle appearing and disappearing throughout the slides, so feel free to reach out at any time. Now, I'm not just a developer advocate for Auth0, I'm also a very active member in the community. I'm the founder and organiser of both ngSpain and GalsTech. ngSpain is an Angular conference based here in Spain, but due to the current situation, well, there isn't going to be one this year, unfortunately. But we hope that by the end of next year, we'll get one on board. GalsTech is a local group for women in tech who it's a safe place for women who are either starting in tech or who want to be promoted or just have a voice, right? So it's something very local. It's called Gals because of girls, but also because of the region where I am, which is Galicia, and tech for obvious reasons. And last but not least, I'm a Women Ambassador, a Women Techmakers Ambassador, and that's because I'm very passionate about diversity and inclusion. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me at any time. Now, I just mentioned that it's all great with web components, right? However, when I speak to people about web components, I get very different reactions. Well, actually, they're not that different. They go along these sort of lines of, oh my gosh, why are you talking to me about web components, to please stop. And last but not least, people that don't want to hear anything about web components. And a good friend of mine, he's a developer advocate too, Mike Hartington. Hi, Mike. He did one of those I have an XYZ joke, right? But about web components. And it's I have a web component joke, but you'll probably hate it for no reason. So why is this? Why do we have this perception or conception of web components? Well, let's go back in time. Let's go back to around 2007 when web components first started. The problem was that not all browsers were on board. Apple was trying to do their own thing. Edge would have had to make a huge effort to make this possible. And also, if we wanted to create them and use polyfills, well, the polyfills weren't great. They were pretty huge. We're talking about 16K compressed. And also, shadow could not be implemented as expected. So, all in all, developers had a bad experience. And they tried it, didn't like it, can't be bothered to try it again. That's normally the kind of response I get. But if we come back to the present, to today, that little rabbit, or big rabbit in this case, has news for you. And it's that browsers have adopted web components. We are not in the situation we were back in 2007. If you don't believe me, take a look at this chart. All major browsers are fully stable, and Edge is too because they adopted Chromium. So there's no need to worry. Browsers are stable on all four technologies that we talked about. But why should I even consider web components? Like, I'm happy with my framework. Why should I go and learn something else? Well, we'll get into the learning part later because it's not a big jump. But I'm going to tell you why I think you should learn about web components. And one of the biggest benefits from web components is that they're interoperable. Remember how earlier at the beginning I said that we can package up our web components into reusable packages and encapsulate them and share them across teams? Well, imagine that, let's give you an example. Imagine that you work in a big company where or maybe you do. Anyhow, let's just go with the story. It's a big company where there are several product teams, right? And each product team has their own product, obviously. And we have a product team that's using Angular, we have another one using Vue, and last but not least, we have one that's using Svelte. However, we need to create a whole new login process because we do, for all of the product teams, because we want the same user experience on this login process. So what do we do? Are we going to really create this login process 3 times, because even though we want to have like the same user experience? Well, that would be 3 times the headaches, 3 times the sleepless nights, and so forth. If we were to create it with a web component, however, we would just have to create it once and then share it across teams. And I think that's so powerful. And if you want to know if the framework you're using actually adopts or has adopted web components, you can do so by checking out this website, Custom Elements Everywhere. It's made by Rob Dodson, who was on the Polymer team. And it tells you basically the percentage of how web component friendly your framework is. So it's not like you have to leave your framework. You can also create web components and add them to the framework of your choice. Also, they have a much better performance because they're using things that are native to the browser. They're using technologies that exist there already. And you can see that depending on which library you choose to work with to create these web components, because yes, you don't have to create them in vanilla JavaScript. We'll take a look at the libraries at the end. But there are many libraries out there, and depending on what library you use, well, the bundle size will be bigger or smaller. And this is a good chart that shows it to you. If you want to see more information on this, I really recommend that you go and check out this source, which I put there. And we've already talked about encapsulation. We don't want leaks. But when we talk about encapsulation, it reminds us of something that I wanted to talk to you all about, styling, right? So styling is so important because I might want an orange button, but maybe you want a green button, or maybe you want to style it however you may want. You might even want a round button and go totally insane. Well, there's ways to go about this, and there's 2 ways. The first way is CSS custom properties, which was the preferred way because of the browser compatibility. However, in a moment we'll see our second option, and we'll also see that browsers are fully on board there too. So benefits of using CSS custom properties is that you can, for example, in the styling of my template, I have a login button, and then I have all the properties that I need, and then I say which properties can be accessed to the outside, to the user of the web component, to the developer of the web component. And you do so by calling var, and then you open parentheses, put the name of the CSS variable there, always starting with a dash, and then a default value there. And that's basically it. And then when the user uses the web component, they call in the style that funkiness that we saw earlier, dash, background, color, or dash, font, weight. I just want to note that these are names that I gave them. You can call them whatever you like, but please make sure that they're readable and understandable. Second option is CSS shadow parts with the part pseudo element. And browsers are now on board, which is really, really cool because it's going to allow you to theme and style your web components accordingly. So the cool thing about this is that, oh, by the way, I forgot to mention the source, really good article. If you want to go more in depth about theming, you should definitely check out this article by Monica. Okay, so we saw a simple button, but it could be so much more. It could be a form, it could be a card, and there might be certain parts of the web component that you want people to be able to style and other parts not, for whatever reason. Well, this can be done through the part pseudo element. So you call the part attribute in your template and then you give it a name. And then what the developer does is in the style sheet, they call the web component, the part pseudo element, and the name of the part. And then they can add whatever pseudo classes they want there, like hover or placeholder or whatever they need. And even though I mentioned that this would be more beneficial in a form or a card or something a bit more complex than just a button, you can also do it on the button. So see, on our login button, we're calling the part attribute and then we have the custom button name. And then in the styling, we have the login button element, the part pseudo element, and the name, and then we can change whatever properties we want to there. Another cool thing are slots. So this will give, again, more flexibility to the user of the user of the web component to decide whether they want to use this part of the web component or not. And it acts like a placeholder. So all we need to do is inside our template, add a slot, remember to give it a name because otherwise the browser is just going to choose it randomly. And then the developer, what they do is they then add the slot attribute, the name of the slot, and use it if they want to. So that's pretty cool. And I'm just going to go back to browser compatibility one more time because I'm so happy about this, and you should all be very excited about this too. And yes, Internet Explorer still exists, not for long I've heard, which is great news. However, polyfills do exist for Internet Explorer and they're very, very tiny, nothing to worry about. They work fantastically. Right, frameworks and libraries. So I mentioned before that I created the web component with vanilla JavaScript. However, we can create it with a library or a framework of our choice. It's not like we have to do it with vanilla JavaScript. And here are a few libraries out there for you. So we have LitElement, we have Hybrids, we have Stencil, which is really, really good, by the way. Polymer, SketchJS, SlimJS. If you're an Angular developer, you have Angular elements. Vue.js also allows you to do so. But just to get an idea of what benefits you get from using a library, I just want to take a moment to look at the LitElement one. Because LitHTML and LitElement are actually the future of Polymer, which is very exciting. And actually, the new official material design web components are based on LitElement, so that's quite nice. Now, you don't need to see this code, don't worry. I know you can't read it. It's not like I want you to read it. I just want you to see the size, like the amount of lines of code there are. Now, this was my button from before, which I already showed you. Now, if I were to recreate this, the one that was built in vanilla.js, if I was to recreate this with LitElement, this would be the size. This will be the amount of lines of code there are. So you can see that it has reduced dramatically. And there are much more benefits, obviously. So we have automatic render updates. We have, remember earlier I said that the learning curve isn't steep if you're coming from like other frameworks. Well, especially if you come from like React, it's kind of like that. So it has a JSX-like. It's quite nice. So it's not like you're going to have to learn something completely different. There's also no virtual DOM except for lists. So much less memory usage and makes things a lot faster. It can work with Babel and TypeScript if you're used to those and want to work with those. That's totally okay. There's no build step required and they're very tiny and light, which we saw in the chart earlier. But when I show the slides, you can then click on the source and dig in deeper to this. So that's really, really nice. Now, if you don't want to create your own web component from scratch, you just want to use something that's out there, there are many, many ready-made UI elements for you. So there are libraries of them. There's wired elements, which is quite nice because it's like hand-drawn web components, which is quite nice. Ionic is fantastic. You should really go try them out. There's Lion web components too. Actually, we're going to take a look at ING in just a second because I want to go on to talking about companies that are actually adopting web components. And there's a bunch more out there, but here are just a few which I think you might recognize. And you can see I want to talk about ING because I know that they're using web components for their features. So this really emphasizes the fact that they don't need to be UI elements. They can be so much more. They are so powerful. And to prove to you how powerful and cool they can be, I just want to show you a few cool projects. So we have the model viewer here. And this is a way to easily display interactive 3D models on the web and in AR. So this is really cool and it's a web component. We also have medical imaging use cases. We have this CSS doodle, which allows you to create CSS patterns. We have a color picker. And we have this SWOR kit that now has a web component that can be implemented inside of their partners' hybrid apps. And it's built with Stencil.js and Ionic framework. And these are just a few of many, many, many that are out there. Now, I did this cool tweet where if you look at the replies, you'll see some of the amazing web components that are out there. Again, this is just a few, but feel free to take a look. Right, so we've been to the past, we went to 2007, we came back to today, we see that web components today are awesome, But what does the future look like? So one thing I didn't mention was that these are elements, these are technologies that are native to the browser. So they're pretty, can we say future safe proof? Maybe, maybe not. You never know with the browsers in JavaScript, but it's looking good. But there are some cool things coming to web components, and one of them is the custom state pseudo class. So this feature lets custom elements expose their state via the state CSS pseudo class. Now, for example, there are some form controls that have an invalid state, right? And these are exposed through the invalid state pseudo class. So just like bulletin elements, just like this invalid pseudo class, custom elements may also have states, and web authors want to expose these states in a similar fashion to built-in elements, and this will allow you to do so. Declarative shadow DOM. So this is going to be a declarative API, and it's going to allow the creation of the shadow root or the shadow DOM using only HTML and no JavaScript. It's also going to allow that web components that use the shadow DOM to also make use of server-side rendering, which I know is a big thing. So that's really nice. And last but not least, form participation API. And this is going to allow custom element authors to provide integrated form controls that behave similarly to built-in elements. And that way, we're going to reduce the need for redundant runtime and load time infrastructure that exists only to replicate what browsers already do. So as you can see, the future is looking pretty bright for web components, and you can check these three out on GitHub because they're really cool, and I think they should be tested, and I know they're coming out pretty soon. So if you have any questions about web components or just want to say hi, please feel free to reach out. My DMs are open, and thank you so much. It's been a real honor speaking here today at CityJS. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that talk. That was very useful, very interesting.
How'd you like it?
We have a few questions for you already. Oh no, they're the previous questions. We'll wait for the new questions to come in. If you have any questions, please add them into the Q&A channel. I have a few questions for you, if you don't mind though, Anna. At Auth0, are you using web components, or is it something you're playing with through work, or is it like just a personal thing you're playing with them?
It's just a personal thing. I've been trying to convince my team, but it's not that easy. We're very much React focused, so.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got a question coming in. Is it possible to utilize styled components for styling web components, or is it?
Well, you can. I know I think it's called Masquerades out there, which allows you to do something very similar. I recently saw an article on that, so when you bring that up, I'll try and find that and post that in the chat later. Obviously, when you have stuff like I was talking about there earlier, the CSS the CSS custom variables, you don't really need to do that because it kind of like overloads your component. So I would really go with just what I talked about in my talk, so CSS custom variables, and also the theming I was talking about back there too. So yeah.
So the built-in browser stuff essentially is.
Yeah, it's best to keep things simple and not over-engineer, right? That way you also keep things small and fast. So
absolutely, I like to keep things simple. Okay, we've got another question. What's the coolest, weirdest, or most pointless use of web components you've seen?
Oh, that's a good one. The coolest is definitely the one I showed you first, the web VR one of the Google, the little astronaut thingy there that you can see. That's really cool. Weirdest. I wouldn't know. I don't actually know. And well, I would. What was the last one? Stupidest, silliest?
The question has disappeared. It was the weirdest. Yeah, it was stupidest.
Stupidest. Okay.
Have you seen
So
any uses of them?
wouldn't say that there's a stupid web component, because maybe you think that a simple UI button could be stupid. However, it could be really, really useful. So I don't find any web component stupid. But yeah, there are some that are badly built. There are plenty out there that are badly built, so they don't work too well.
Yeah. But if you learn something in the process, that's beneficial, right? So that's a good thing.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay, this is one of the ones I was wondering about, actually. So you mentioned SSR there.
Yeah.
And that there is the ability to do SSR. I assume the main benefit of that is sort of SEO. What is the story of SEO? Is it basically a JavaScript app, and the search engines call it like it's a JavaScript app, or is there anything else going on there? The actual question is, what's the state of SSR for web components?
So the state of SSR, that's going to be coming soon with that new feature. I do think that when it comes to SEO, it really depends on the web component that you build. If you're trying to make something very native to the browser, such as a button, you do have to remember to add all of the features of adding that you would to a button to make it like known to the browser as if it was a native button. So, and that in those cases, for SEO purposes, it's always good to add accessibility and make it more legible, right?
Okay. Right, we've got a loaded question. I've not read the question. I've just seen it's loaded.
Oh.
One we've taken a particular route on already, but could you speak on accessibility with web components? So yeah, just talking about the how accessible web components are.
Yeah, you have to implement that completely yourself, and you should, obviously. Anything that you're going to put public, make sure it's accessibility friendly. There's a golden standard checklist which you can check. It's on GitHub. I'll drop that link later too, because it's really important that you do take these measures. So if you do create a button, don't forget to add that it's a button. If it is a button, use a button tag. And if you can't for whatever reason, then use your area labels and whatnot there. So please do take accessibility in mind.
Presumably, if you're extending a native element, then you get the benefits of the native element still from accessibility point of view, would you?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess the search engines wouldn't.
Well, that I'm not too sure about
Okay.
now that you mention it, but I'm pretty sure you do have to make the extra effort when it comes to web component from what I've seen from the golden standard checklist.
Okay.
Because it's one of the items on there.
Okay. Right, we've got another one here. How complex web components could get? For example, putting payment in one part, auth another. Could it face growing complexity as number of elements grow?
Definitely. But like everything, do not over-engineer them. Keep them simple, keep them small. You don't want to add too much complexity to one component, because that web component won't serve for any other purpose, and that takes out the purpose of web components, right? Because they're meant to be reusable. So make sure you keep them nice and simple. And well, if you need to make it complex, then it's probably you're the only person that's going to be using it.
Okay. Okay. Do you think that any more hurdles web components need to jump so people don't look so horrified like in the presentation when they're mentioned?
Honestly, no. I think they're there. You just need to use them. Actually, I was speaking to my colleague earlier, Sam, who's also at the booth. I was saying to him, like, if you want to use web components, then just add it to your Svelte application that you're already building. Just pick a web component that's already out there on open web components or wherever, and just plug it in to see how it feels and what you feel like doing with it. Just so you get a feel for them. You don't have to start a whole new application. You can already use what you have and just plug one in.
Makes sense. This is just one for me. I think we've got the main questions there. How are you packaging your components? Do you package it as like NPM modules, or how
you can? You can, but again, if you do that, you're putting them out to the public. So make sure you're doing them properly. Look at that golden standard checklist that I love so much.
Oh, it's on there. Lovely.
Yeah. but you can just like share them across teams as they are, so you don't need to.
Very nice. I think that's the main questions. Anything else you want to say before we disappear, Anna?
No, that was actually pretty nice and quick.
Lovely.
So thank you all so much.
Thank you very much. I think we've got little JavaScript bundles of joy coming up next, but we'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers, Anna. Bye-bye.